Oh gosh. Uh, I'm here with Fred Jennings, and he just said something highly inappropriate, but we'll let that slide. Fred, my man, how you doing? So I want to let you introduce yourself, but Fred and I met through Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. We'll first get to know Fred, and then we'll talk about Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. So, Fred, what would you like for people to know about you?
Oh, well, I'm an ecological economist, somewhat of a renegade from the sort of standard view of economics, but probably the ecological economics family is about as close to a home as I have in my profession. Um, the distinguishing features of ecological economics, I guess I should say something about, are that as distinct from environmental economics, which uses standard models to look at environmental issues, ecological economics really takes an ecological approach and looks at systems and interdependence and how, basically wrestling with the question of, once you recognize that everything is connected to everything else, then what we really like to have is omniscience, because we want to be able to see everything that's going on in order to understand the parts that we're able to look at. But we can't do that because
What are the benefits of ecological economics? Why does the world need ecological economics?
ah um, well, because to put it bluntly, orthodox economics is causing a great deal of ecological destruction and ethical loss. And I have a course that I'm just starting to teach that gets into some of those issues, but that basically ecological economics is at least is trying to look at the whole system and looking at economics as a subset of an ecological context. And that I think one of the real failures of the orthodox view in economics is that it doesn't pay any attention to the ecological context, and as a result has basically produced a great, very destructive effects on our ecological existence, and we depend on that existence, so we ought to be concerned about it.
What I've done is I've pulled up the page on Bio for Climate website and Economics of Love, and I am going to put that. Oh, here we go. It's already there. So,
Okay,
an
if you
Economics of Love.
x out the donation thing, there's a little X over on the right of this blue bar.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Economics of Love starts April 15th, free intro on April 8th. Now, the way I got here is to go to bio 4 climate, and the 4 is a number, bio4climate.org. Announce well, in the search bar, it has a good search bar. If you put in an Economics of Love, then it takes you straight to the course. So that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah,
An economics.
there are a number of boxes that will open up if you search for an economics of love, but there's one that says ecological economics 2024, and that's the page that we have open here.
Okay, good. So our economic system our economic system's focus on competition has led to, let me see if I can blow up this text. So
Yeah, that's better.
yeah, and our economic system's focus on competition has led to significant destruction. We have an opportunity to create economic systems built on collaboration and love. We can embed incentives of support, health, and abundance in our communities and restore ecosystems of natural resources that we need to survive and thrive. Join us for an Economics of Love with Dr. Fred Jennings and find your place in the transition ahead. And classes meet on Mondays from April 15th to July 8th, et cetera, et cetera. So I recommend that our
12 to
audience check
12
that
to,
out.
yeah, from 12 to 1 p.m.
Okay.
Eastern time. Although if we have a lively discussion, I've made arrangements so that we can spill over into another hour if people want to.
Right. Well, so you're a Harvard graduate, right? We should
Yeah,
mention that.
I was a Harvard undergraduate, and then I ended up getting a PhD from Stanford University. And what I jokingly say to people about that is that I've had more and better education than is good for anybody.
So, what do we want people to know about biodiversity for a livable climate? What's the big idea there?
The big idea for biodiversity for a livable climate, and it's pretty unique in this sense, is that it's really working uh, to resolve some of the issues that have to do with climate change through ecological restoration. That climate change is not about carbon emissions, or at least not only about carbon emissions. It's about water, and it's about a dry and overheated planet. And so there are lots of ways we can change our behavior, both in agriculture and in protecting and restoring grasslands and forests, that can cool the planet if
How
we
does
get
that work?
about it.
How does
What?
that work? How does that work? How
Um,
does that cool the planet?
okay, you're asking an economist about deeply biological things, but I have learned a lot since I've been involved with Bio for Climate now for 8 years, and I've learned a lot about how forests have a cooling effect by basically pulling water up through their roots and transpiring it out into the atmosphere, and how basically not only does rain create forests, but forests create rain. And these things are really interesting to me. And also, one of the things that sort of had struck me, I went to a complex systems conference some years ago, and there was a paper being presented on resilience. And I realized that, the models in economics that had been taught were all basically static equilibria, within which there's no need for resilience because there's no change. And that if the economy is better analyzed as a moving, dynamic ecological system where it's never settles down and is constantly changing, then suddenly the role of biodiversity in protecting the resilience of the system so it can adapt to change becomes very relevant. So, I was sort of laughing at my own training that it set up a situation where I couldn't see any reason for resilience until I broke out of the way I was trained into thinking about the world in a larger and more accurate way.
So you've used the word resilience a couple of times. How does that come into play? What would you like for people to know about resilience?
Well, my experience with resilience is in the intellectual realm. So let me start there because it's not only relevant to biology. That if you have lots of variety in an intellectual environment, then you have to deal with difference in lots of ways, and that's a learning environment because you're constantly being confronted with different ideas that you need to understand. And as the world changes, those different ideas become relevant in different ways. So the more variety you have, then the sort of framework of analysis, instead of breaking because it's no longer relevant to the changed situation, you can adapt. Well, and that's the same thing that happens in biology, that if the environment is full of a wild biodiversity of plant species, then as the environment changes, such as with global warming, then those different species have different specialties, and the system can survive. I mean, some of the species will die out and other species will come in, but at least if there's lots of biodiversity, it's resilient to change. So, I mean, and that's really the point. It's one of the reasons why Biodiversity for a Livable Climate chose the name that it has.
Shouldn't we just try to maximize GDP?
Yeah, and we could probably do that by engaging in a lot of destructive activities, because those are usually counted as positive rather than negative in GDP. I mean, I'm being a little cynical, but I really think the whole measure of GDP and measuring growth and all that is part of a sort of materialistic focus on economics, which I tend to avoid, because I think the purpose of economics, and I posed this actually yesterday in my sneak preview for my course. The purpose of economics is to try to develop systems that promote the well-being of the most people that it can. And I guess my sense is that, we're probably not doing very well on that level of performance.
Does it promote the interests of some people more than others, and how does that work?
Well, that's been one of the problems, is that, we have a system that rewards the most predatory people. And so we end up with the most predatory people rising to the top and getting the most money. The problem with that is that, at least in my work, that if we do as I would like to see us do and shift our systems in the direction of more cooperative frames, predatory behavior is going to make cooperation impossible. I mean,
well, I thought our system rewarded the most productive people. You're saying it rewards predatory behavior, not just productivity.
I am saying that. And yes, I mean, the economics I was taught was basically that, yes, the most productive people get rewarded, and that's a good thing. I guess, as I have aged, I have seen through a somewhat different, less Pollyanna-ish lens that economic power and market power is running rampant in our society, and that's not necessarily going to generate the most productive people coming out on top. It's going to generate, there are productive people who are successful, but they're also, basically in a society in which ethics are not a major player in our culture. Predation thrives in many ways in our society.
Okay, so there are people who think that private property is like the key, that if you have private property, then you're going to be a good steward of that property, and that's the key to adding value to everything. What do you think of that?
Oh, good question. I used to be a libertarian, and I used to very much believe in private property as giving a sense of security for us. I did a study back in 1999 for Greenpeace on a scheme to privatize fisheries. And, through the development of what they call individual tradable quotas, transferable quotas, and where you own a certain percentage of the total allowable catch of a fishery. And that was supposed to create a sense of stewardship over that fishery. I don't believe it works that way. I think that, what it does is, basically increase the exploitative pressure on fisheries. And I think these privatization schemes, the problem I see with these privatization schemes is that, anything that basically emphasizes and encourages acquisitive values is not going to be friendly to the ecological system. That what we need is to inculcate a greater ecological conscience where we become more aware of and take better care of the ecological system on which we depend for our very survival.
Sounds like communism to me.
Well, the case for cooperation, I've had actually interesting arguments with libertarians about cooperation being identified somehow with communism and collectivism. And I had the delightful experience of trying to explain to a libertarian friend of mine that cooperation is not cooperation unless it is voluntary. It's coercion if it's not voluntary. So, the essence of cooperation is a libertarian concept. So, and I thought it was delightful to sort of having to explain something that it took me a long time to figure out, but, that explain something to a card-carrying libertarian who clearly didn't think that cooperation made any sense at all.
So you think cooperation is a libertarian concept?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you mean?
Well, because, in order to have a successful cooperative system, everybody's really got to be on the same page, and they have to choose to be on the same page, because if they don't choose to be on the same page, any individual has the ability to screw things up and to destroy the kind of trust that is required for a cooperative system to function well.
Isn't the American system based on free markets?
I guess it depends on what you mean by free.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what I would say. Markets are, markets are defined by rules, and who gets to make up the rules. And it's typically the people who get to make up the rules is not the Democratic majority.
Well, I would agree with that. I think the the way I look at it is that we all inhabit an incentive structure, and that incentive structure is composed of real rules and cultures and the legal system and peer pressure, other people's beliefs. So we respond within that incentive structure. And what I used to teach my students is that the better you understand how the incentive structure around you is manipulating your behavior, the less likely you're going to be successfully manipulated by it, because you can learn to ignore, those manipulative effects on you. And that's what I would call freedom.
So you're a fisherman, right? Or shall we say fisher person?
Either way.
Yeah.
An angler.
Angler. So tell me about your fishing.
My fishing. Well, I used to fish a lot of freshwater, for trout and steelhead, but in recent years, I've been fishing more in saltwater for striped bass, and the what's the distinctive aspect of my fly fishing, and it's all fly fishing, is that I use ultralight tackle in salt water in an estuary and canoes. So we don't use motors. It's a nice way of making contact with the natural world. And the whole idea of fly fishing, I think, which I find its greatest charm, is that it's a way of making a connection to a natural world in which we are aliens, and that I find when I'm out on the estuary that I'm sort of feeling with my fly, or searching with my fly, and trying to imitate what's going on under the water out there well enough to fool a creature into thinking that this mess of stuff that I have tied on a hook is a real minnow or a real crab or something, and doing it well enough in terms of its physical characteristics and the way I move it.
So with fly fishing, I see. I think
realistically enough,
okay,
to fool a fish into grabbing that fly,
right.
thinking it's actual real food.
So with fly fishing, you're casting the weight of the line, right, instead of the weight of the lure.
Yes, and it's hell to learn, but it's lovely once you get it.
How does economics apply to fisheries?
Oh, to fisheries or to fly fishing?
and any of it.
Well, I mean, economics applies to fisheries because the ocean fisheries are probably the last environment in which sort of hunter gathering is still the active way of fishing. Now, that's not to say that we've gotten very skilled at finding fish and using technology to kill fish, but part of the economics of that, which has not been a success, has been that in the fisheries management process, you need to understand well enough how well a fisheries stock is doing, so you can limit the harvest. And it's it hasn't been very successful because at least in the United States, the commercial fishery interests are in control of the fisheries management process, so that they continually exploit the fisheries, and those fisheries are in seriously dangerous shape. And the whole ocean ecology at this point is under threat, and we've got big problems if we do much more damage to the ocean ecology. And yet we continue to do so.
What do you think of the phrase tragedy of the commons?
Oh, what an interesting question. I have spent a lot of time on the tragedy of the commons and thinking about it, because I think it's, it's a real phenomenon in certain sense. For example, an oil field that has a mess of people pumping oil from it around the edges of it. If you have them competing with each other, they're all going to pump just as fast as they can, because I want to get the oil into my tanks before it goes into somebody else's and is not available to me. And the same phenomenon happens in what I call a race for fish, where people, competitive fishermen, are going to, all fish as hard as they can on the assumption that the other fishermen are going to take the fish if they don't take them. Well, appreciate that the common assumption in that mode of behavior is that the fishery is doomed. It's just a matter of who gets it first. But that's not the way traditional fisheries were managed. And I think, Eleanor Ostrom, as an economist who won the Nobel Prize some years ago, the late Eleanor Ostrom, she taught us about common property management systems that were in traditional fisheries, where local communities manage their fisheries very well. What happens, however, is that if these multinational ships come in, they will clear cut the fishery, and then local communities are SOL. So, you need to basically have strict enforcement to protect the communal artisanal fisheries where they exist, and limit the sort of corporate greed that will take every fish and will take the last fish in the ocean if they aren't regulated to stop them.
Let me share with you something that makes sense to me, and that is local control would solve a lot of problems. And as opposed to what? As opposed to, we have two major bodies of law that that tend to drive, like the current interpretation of the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution is interpreted in such a way that you can't discriminate against an out-of-state business, that a state or local law can't discriminate against an out-of-state business. I think that inherently favors the big businesses vis-a-vis the small ones, and that's why every locality is flooded with out-of-town restaurants and things like that. Another thing, similarly, the World Trade Organization, of which NAFTA is a part, NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. So it creates a right to sue on behalf of a corporation if a government, if a state, local, or federal government does anything that might threaten the profits of a corporation, then that corporation has a right to sue. Well, but you put those two things together, the United States Commerce Clause and the World Trade Organization, and they always favor the big players, and ipso facto, or by the very same token, it means that local people don't have the right to say no. They don't have the right to protect their local natural resources, the local markets, etc. And if I could change, if you gave me 5 things that I could change about the world, I think that would be one of them, to give people the right to control their land, their markets, their resources locally.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically a result of the role of corporate power and money in politics. That, what we need to do is what Common Cause has been working on for years. I don't even know if they still exist, but to get money out of politics and stop the control over political decisions that are influenced heavily by large donations of money and lobbyists, and with with a revolving door in the regulatory system, where people who go into the regulatory agencies are usually drawn from the industry, and they end up with high-paid jobs back in the industry when they're done on the regulatory commission. And they are clearly, have a vested interest and a conflict of interest by this pattern of behavior, and it means that the legal system and the system of rules and regulations that are developed are not serving the public need or interest. They're serving the corporate profits.
Okay,
And
so
that's
what
a
they
big
would
problem.
say, what they would say is two things. One is we're creating jobs, and another is it's good for the economy to let like U.S. go, like let Americans buy land in Africa or Haiti and vice versa, presumably, that's good for the economy and it creates jobs. So what do you think of that?
Well, I would challenge that argument, but I also would, because I think the creating jobs, and when it actually is the effect, that we need to see the big picture and understand the consequences on all sorts of other levels that we tend to ignore. But I also think my primary concern would be on the environmental impact of some of these issues, because as you say, one of the worst things about NAFTA is that you can prevent environmental regulations by private lawsuits against, if I'm losing profits because of a regulation, I can sue the to stop those regulations, and that's not that only serves one set of interests, and it's not the public interest.
And those, when a company sues under NAFTA or under the World Trade Organization, that is heard in a private tribunal as a secret tribunal of three corporate lawyers. They don't have to. It's secret. They don't have to report on what their findings are or why. And that's one thing. It's secret. And another thing is that the corporation wins almost every single time. There's only been one of those suits. Like the only suit that they've lost, to my knowledge, is when they tried to privatize. They tried to sue Canada for the fact that Canada had a post office. And who knows why they were turned down, but I think it would have made for bad optics. It's like, WTF, Canada can't have a post office because a corporation sued it.
Yeah, no, that's absurd. But but I think that the problem of corporate power and corporate influence over the political system is a source of so many of the other social problems that we have, because the system's not fair. I mean, it's not treating everybody equally. There are people who have special interests and special advantages that who can buy influence over the political decision-making process, and that's a very dangerous situation to be in.
Okay, so why should people care, and what's Fred Jennings' vision for the world?
My vision. Well, the title of my course is An Economics of Love, and I I thought about about that title a lot before I decided on it, because I mean, we don't live in a society where people talk a lot about love, and they certainly don't talk about love in the context of economics. And in fact, the sort of the whole notion of economics, the way I was taught economics, was that economics is all about scarcity and about choice and about trade-offs and about markets, and basically that the assumption is that there's an inherent conflict of interest in society, in our social relations, and therefore that, we need to compete for scarce resources with each other, against each other, in order to sort of be sure that those resources are going to where they're most desired. But there's a problem with that view, and that is that social relations aren't just substitutional in the sense of either or relationships and conflict. That social relations are also complementary. You know, if our needs and wants and values are aligned, I rejoice in your success. It's not a threat to me. And
Well,
that's,
what they say is that everybody benefits from the competition because it makes everybody better and it makes the world better. That the competition itself, that's what they say. What do you say?
well, I say that's wrong. Uh, that that's a that's a narrowly specialized view of how economic relations are structured, and that they are the assumption that our needs and wants are in conflict is an assumption that needs very urgently to be questioned, because there's a very different way of looking at the economic process that suggests that we're missing out on something that would be far more productive if we could set down our differences and work together in a cooperative way.
Yeah, here's one thing that I say, and in response to the idea that everything is scarce and you have to have competition and property ownership, et cetera, in order to optimize the use of those resources, et cetera, et cetera. I say, well, some resources are scarce and some resources are abundant. And one thing we have, our economic system and our laws, our public policy affecting economics sometimes take something that's scarce and treat it as if it's abundant. And then we take something that's abundant and treat it as if it's scarce. Quite the opposite. So I say human creativity are abundant if you allow them to flourish. So we shouldn't treat them as if they're scarce. And then there are things like land. Aldo Leopold said something to the effect that he pointed to the idea that we treat land as if it's a commodity that belongs to us. So, but land has a certain scarcity to it, but then land would create abundant fruits if we allowed it to, if we, set it up for success, so to speak.
Well, if we managed it for abundance, it could provide very much more to us. And one of the things that I kind of wrestled with in my own understanding was that, as civilization develops, the nature of goods shift, and the nature of wants shifts away from, relatively anyway, shifts away from material goods to intangible goods. But intangible goods are not scarce in the same way as material goods are. And take information as an example, or love for that matter. That when I give you information, or you give me information, or we have a conversation such as this, I don't lose what I give you. You don't lose what you give me. And the process produces new insight that neither of us had at the outset. So it's a productive process. You want integration, you want sharing, you want cooperation, because that's what produces better and more information and better knowledge. And I actually ended up doing an experiment when I was teaching at Tufts in the early 80s, where in response to a number of my fairly aggressive group of young ladies in my course, the 3 or 4 of them, they came into my office and said, Professor Jennings, you've been teaching us a lot about cooperation. We want to do our take-home final exam together. And I sort of scratched my head and said, okay, yeah, okay, why not? Let's see what happens. And they put together an exam that was really amazing. And so I institutionalized what I called a collusive final exam option, where if they'd been in a study group for the whole semester, so they'd developed a common language and had a lot of trust in each other, then I would, with my permission, they could do an exam as a study group, but they had to come into the scheduled exam session to do an individual exam because the system requires me to test them separately. What I found was that when a group of that kind started to cook, they all learned what each other had figured out. And they basically integrated the whole course at a level that was without all of the, technical niceties. My principal students were putting together stuff at the graduate level in terms of their understanding. And I was just blown away. It suggested to me what we're missing in not creating that sort of cooperative environment. And I have to add that some of my faculty colleagues, when watching what I was doing, felt that I was allowing these students to cheat because they should be standing on their own feet. And I just, anyway, that was just.
How do you think that could be applied? How do you think that learning could be applied more broadly?
Oh, I think that the role of competition, the impact of competition in our educational system has fostered and reinforced a fear of learning that has enormous cultural effects. And you see it out there if you look for it, that the people avoid intellectual discussion. They avoid people who know more than they do because they feel threatened by that. Those are great misfortunes for us all, because your knowledge and your education is going to benefit me, as my education and understanding will benefit you. And we would all benefit from a well-educated and caring, knowledgeable social environment, which we don't have.
Let me share with you a quote from John Maynard Keynes. This is about almost 100 years ago, and it's the idea that we should be approaching a time when our needs are taken care of so that we'll have more and more leisure time. Well, for some reason that didn't happen. But here's what John Maynard Keynes wrote. He says, for the first time since creation, man will be faced with his permanent problem: how to use his freedom from pressing economic cares, how to occupy the leisure which science and compound interest will have won for him, to live wisely and agreeably and well. The strenuous, purposeful moneymakers may carry all of us along with them into the lap of economic abundance, but it will be those peoples who can keep alive and cultivate into a fuller perfection the art of life itself, and do not sell themselves for the means of life, who will be able to enjoy the abundance when it comes.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that essay on the what is it, the end of
Economic
capital?
Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, John Maynard Keynes,
Yeah.
1930.
And
Keynes on the accumulation of capital versus shorter work time and the possibilities for freedom during the Great Depression.
yeah, and he had this view, and I look back, and hindsight is always 2020, but it's like he was reasoning in a silo, or in a vacuum, a bubble, because again, there's no awareness within that statement about the context of where economics takes place, which is within an ecological system, because economic forces have been doing a lot of damage to the ecological system, and that's undermining the life support system of the planet. So, as I say, I used to be a pretty hard-ass libertarian back in my early days, and I think I find myself now under the belief that a universal basic income would increase a lot of financial security in the population, and basically allow people to be less stressed out. And I think that would have a cultural impact that would be very helpful, because I see the role. I actually was just this afternoon, after our meeting, having a conversation with one of my friends about how he was expressing concern about the prevalence of fear and fear-based behavior in our society. And I think that's becoming an increasingly dangerous threat to our peaceful existence. And
Fear of what?
just fear of financial insecurity, fear of violence, and fear of, being exposed, being open. People are not open with each other. We do not live in general anyway, in an honest, open culture. Uh, there, what what you described, for example, in this secret 3-judge system in NAFTA, that without transparency in our social systems and our legal and rule systems, uh, all sorts of bad stuff can go on that we don't know about. And I think that we are we have lots of issues that are worrisome in our culture. And but I think the amount of fear, I see fear and love as opposites. And my own thinking has been that what we need is an economics of love, but we're a long way from that.
Here's something that I think is fairly foundational to our economic system, such as it is, and that is some people want the average worker to be insecure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
about power.
yeah. If you're an employer, you can get people to work harder for less if they're insecure.
Yeah,
And our system has many ways of making people more insecure. Conversely, there are many opportunities to make people more secure. A universal basic income would be one. A more robust program for retirement income would be another. Health insurance would be another. If people had single payer health care, that would be a way.
free
And
education would be nice too.
yeah, and it's like education K through 12 is a human right, but after that, it's a communist plot, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, in my course, I'm really exploring some of the dimensions of the difference between an economics of love and what we might characterize as an economics of fear. But I also, have long had the feeling, and I think I got this directly from my parents' attitude, which was similar, that I hope there's a specially warm corner of hell for people who treat support staff poorly. And, the people that are going around sort of looking for somebody else to feel better than. And, that's such a pathological attitude, because one of the things that I learned when I was teaching and that I continue to savor is that everybody has something interesting about them to learn. And, that if you deal with people as sort of on an egalitarian basis, you learn a lot more about things that are interesting than you would if you put people down. But I think the people who are putting other people down are not about learning. That's not, they're sort of, massaging their ego by putting other people down and therefore feeling better than they are. And that
So here's my response.
wrong with it.
My response is, how much of that would go away if our economic system were organized around well-being instead of whatever it is now?
Yeah.
Gain, competition, and gain. I
And
mean, and with the technology that we have, if you gave people a choice, would you rather have less money and more free time, or more money and less free time? You see, another thing that's related to that in my mind is that we can have civilization or we can have culture, but I don't think we can have both, because I think civilization, such as it is the enemy of culture. And civilization is a way of life. Derek Jensen's definition of civilization is a way of life based on the growth of cities. And to me, every city is a little empire, which you have this collection of people, and then outside collection of people concentrated in a geographic area, and the land base that they're on is not sufficient to give them all the things that they think they need. So you have to get your resources from elsewhere. Elsewhere is where somebody else lives, and you need a military to take from them what they don't really need as much as you need. So it's based on every city is an empire. It's based on theft. It's based on gunboat diplomacy and an economics where you need a military to support your economic system, such that you have to rape Haiti for 200 years and exploit Africa, and you feel like you need to enslave people in the Democratic Republic of Congo, because you need that to make lithium ion batteries. You need lithium ion batteries to make your electric car. You need your electric car to make you feel good that you are somehow doing something good for the planet, but it's on the backs of slaves. So don't get me started.
So are you trying to convince me that slavery is really a means of making us all better off?
Exactly.
You're reminding me of a book that I've been reading.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That is my book. That is my book. That is my Bible.
That your Bible? I thought Phil Bogdanoff had recommended that, but maybe it was you. I've been intrigued by that book. I'm about 80 pages in, and
oh my
I'm
gosh,
fascinated.
I absolutely love that book. I'm going to interview the
very
author sometime.
erudite, and it's also quite funny and clever.
Yeah.
Very well written. But I think that a good my focus on what is wrong with our system and our way of life has to do with culture. That, if that, but economics has been responsible for teaching the world on the basis of a sort of Adam Smith invisible hand concept that selfishness and greed are good for everybody. And I think, for all sorts of reasons that I don't really want to get into because they're too sort of complicated economic issues, but that view is not correct. That, what we really need is an economics of cooperation that emphasizes caring and kindness and generosity, and that we'd all be far better off in a culture that reflects those sentiments.
Let me share with you a way that I have put that in the past and see if this resonates. I wrote a
Okay.
meme one time. For the uninitiated, my memes are like 60 or 70 words and 3 or 4 sentences. But I said that we have an economy of production. We need to move from an economy of production to an economy of care. Production implies goods, it implies materials throughput, it implies extracting something from somewhere, either something living or something non-living. Non-living means mining, etc. Living means forestry and agriculture. So you're going to extract something from somewhere and you're going to transport it and refine it and make it into something, transport it from the factory to the wholesale and to the retail, and that's what the economy is built on. There's because it's thought that that's what we need. We could have an economy of care where we take care of what we already have. If we could put people to work caring for our forests, our farms, our waterways, our young people, our old people, our students, our whoever else needs to be cared for.
And
We could
nurturing
have,
each other's well-being.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is my conception of what we will need to develop if we are going to survive the poly crises that are coming at us.
Let me read a little bit from.
That's actually, pretty reflective of the sort of indigenous practices that the Western cultures kind of laid waste to.
Well, another thing I like saying is that the why are we measuring gross domestic product or gross world product as if human well-being is a function of the amount of money that changes hands? Why don't we measure gross domestic happiness? Why don't we make happiness an issue instead of the amount of money that changes hands? And we know the reason for that, and that is the powers that be are it would undermine their control for us to be focused on happiness and for us to start to demand public policy that goes to our happiness, like healthcare and like not having to work all the time, and like care of people, care of students, the young, the old, the disabled, care of our forests, farms, waterways, care of our food system, care of our communication system. We could just care for what we already have instead of thinking we have to churn out product.
Well, and there's a certain cultural attitude among those in power in our society. I say this with sadness and as an unfortunate thing, but that a lot of them
Say it with
seem,
anger and vitriol.
well, yeah, and they view their success as on the backs of the poor, and that that it's a zero-sum game, and that the way they're going to get more is to impoverish the people around them. And that to me is a sort of shrunken and narrow view, because I think that, bringing up everyone in the caring kind of environment will bring everybody up. It'll make everybody better off, and that there isn't this sort of inherent conflict of interest in society.
Fred, you're
But
talking about the wealth creators.
yeah, I am. So
They're the
they say
people who
that's how
create
they
our
do it.
wealth. They create our wealth.
Yeah, well, that's how they do them.
You don't want to kill the golden goose. You don't want to bite the hand that feeds you.
Oh, I think that's. Let me put my waders on because it's getting deep in here.
You be thinking about your final words of wisdom for this call. I want to read a little bit of Civilized to Death by Christopher Ryan. And it says introduction. No, show us the cover, please. Show us the cover once again.
I want to read you one paragraph out of here that I.
Okay, good. So we're reading from Civilized to Death. I'm going to read a paragraph, and then Fred's going to do the same. But he starts out, introduction, know thy species. Call me ungrateful. This is Christopher Ryan. Call me ungrateful. I've got silver fillings in my teeth, artisanal beer in my fridge, and a world of music in my pocket. I drive a Japanese car with cruise control, power steering, and airbags poised to cushion me in an explosive embrace should I drift off. I wear German glasses that darken in California sunlight, and I'm writing these words on a computer that's thinner and lighter than the book they'll eventually be printed in. I enjoy the company of friends I'd have lost if they hadn't been saved by emergency surgery, and for the last 17 years of his life, my father's blood was filtered through the liver of a man named Chuck Zerner, who died in 2002. I have every reason to appreciate the many wonders of civilization, and yet,
Yeah,
it's not possible to read the next paragraph and get a sense for where he's going with this.
right.
But where he's going with this is, I had it. Here we go. I'm not sure how much of I can read of this and not get in copyright trouble, but anyway, read your part.
I just, there was one paragraph that when I was at my friend's house in upstate New York this weekend, and there was one paragraph that just jumped out at me, and I found myself reading it to my friends just to share it. And it's on the bottom of page 37. And it says, paeans to progress will always be a part of the civilizational package, because any system predicated upon incessant growth will insist on defining all movement as movement forward, like the falling man who insists he's flying until he isn't. I love that paragraph.
Yeah.
Until he isn't.
Yeah, until he isn't. The falling man who insists he's flying until he isn't. Well, another thing about economic growth, I mean, I've heard the most glowing, like this guy, Mark Andreessen, who is the Techno Optimist Manifesto, who has just this glowing ode to economic growth. And he confuses two things. And the idea is that growth is always good, where you're not alive unless you're growing. And well, that's true in the intangible world, but not in the tangible world. If you keep growing, then you become fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. How long can that go on? So
that's the survival.
GDP measures the physical. GDP measures the physical growth. It does not measure the things that really matter, the intangible growth.
Yeah, I mean, that's the survival of the fattest.
But
no, I one of the things that I have, sort of developed an understanding of is that the economics of intangibles is not the same economics as that of material physical goods. It's a different realm, and it's
Right.
a realm which calls for cooperation, because the argument is that in an economics of substitution or scarcity, competition is a way to sort out desire. I mean, on making some other assumptions about income equity, which we can't make in this culture, but anyway. But the point is that in a world of complementarity, i.e., consilience, where your interests and mine are aligned, competition reduces output and well-being. So, you basically, what you need is cooperation, because that's how, the total of these intangible goods will grow, and the well-being associated with them will grow. And so, then the question is, okay, well, in what realms of activity are substitution important, and what realms of activity is complementarity important? And obviously, among the realm of intangibles, complementarity is more important. Well, in that realm, competition is reducing our well-being. And, whenever you run up into a paywall, you can appreciate the impact of that. But there are lots of contexts in which that happens. Think of a family which starts competing over who's being loved the most, and what that'll do to the total amount of love in that environment. Competition does not work in sharing love. It'll reduce the amount.
This has been a conversation with Fred Jennings. I want our audience to go to Bio for Climate. That is bio, the number 4, climate, and then put in your search bar, Bio for Climate and Economics of Love, and it will bring you the course that starts on April 15th.
Yeah, Fred, it's bioforclimate.org.
Mm-hmm. But even without the .org, it still gets you to that page.
Yeah, okay.
The search yields that.
Good.
So thank you so much, Fred, and we'll have to talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Hart. I have enjoyed the conversation. I never sort of knew quite what you were going to ask me, but that was fun.
I think you rolled with the punches. You took the beating like a pro, and you dished it out.
My sense of humor saves me in lots of situations. So
right, that's not what I heard.
And with that, we probably should be
right.
done.
We're quit while we're ahead. Okay.
Yeah,
bye, Fred.
Thanks, Hart.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.